So now when the kids are younger, it's different because mom has the full ability to control what's going in to her and to her breast milk, right? So we have that. The next thing is, as kids are starting to eat their own foods, now what? So the first thing I always look at is trying to use safe starch alternatives over any kind of grain. I think that's always safer. So I'll always go to a yucca flour or a cassava flour or some kind of an arrowroot, which is usually a combination of primarily yucca, as a good, healthy, safe starch if we're going to consume something processed, right? So I always try to keep that in mind. Number one, we don't get a lot of those in our society, right? And number two, we don't have the gluten sensitivity component because there are other types of grains, corn, rice, and oat that, you know, are in that gluten-free category. They don't have gliadin in it, but they have horsinin or avenin or a zine in the form of corn. And these are cousins and sisters and brothers of gluten. And there could be this case of mistaken identity, just like there's a family resemblance in certain families. Well, there's a immune resemblance to the immune system in regards to gluten. So we got to keep that in the back of our head.
Yeah, so if you just look up gluten cross-reactivity, there's actually some testing out there, some highly advanced, expensive testing that you could do if you wanted to try to get an answer on paper. But a lot of times you can just figure it out based on how you feel if you get a rash, for example. Like I was doing organic blue corn chips for a while. I loved them. This was probably a couple of years ago. And then I started to have reaction. It would either be like a headache or just some change with the skin. And so you're basically saying that with the receptor, corn can sort of fit into this gluten receptor, meaning that the body gets tricked. It's sort of like, oh, this is gluten. And then boom, it's going to go create this inflammatory response. But it was an accident. It wasn't actually gluten, it was corn. And this is the same thing with chocolate, believe it or not, and coffee as well. What else is on that list? Potato is on the list, yeast. You mentioned rice. I mean, gluten cross reactivity is a huge, huge link to skin problems. So this is like the low hanging fruit to look at.
Yeah, there's definitely that. So we have to keep that kind of in our mind. That's like the first thing, because there are a lot of people that come onto this camp and they just, you know, gluten-free is a very trendy thing. We always draw a line between gluten-free processed and grain-free alternatives. That's really, really important to kind of highlight, number one.